Let me introduce that my name's Anne Saller, and we're coming from Book Carnival, and we're delighted to host both Gary Grossman and Ed, I'm looking for your last name, Ed?
Fuller.
Fuller, thank you. I knew I would go blank on something. I always do.
Just like the brush man. Remember Fuller brush man?
Oh, that'll help me, except I think there's something missing when it comes to names because everybody knows how bad I am with them. We were delighted to have you, what it is now, 2 years at least, for the Red Hotel, which was not what many of us expected when we first read the book. The title was a little deceptive, and we really were thinking one thing, and it turned out to be something very different, but fascinating. And so now we're ready to hear all about this one, which is seems to be doing very well already. Your sales are going a little crazy. It has to feel good.
Absolutely.
All right. Who's going to talk about it first?
Well, we probably will start off by saying the book itself is a continuation of the Red Hotel. It's not required that you read the Red Hotel first, but to help out, we have the Red Hotel currently on sale as a paperback, not quite as expensive. So if somebody needs to get that to feel good about transitioning into the other book, that's great. But we've tried to identify most of the key players that are still alive in the early parts of the second book. And so you can read it with comfort either way. So the book itself is a continuation of Dan Riley. Anybody know who Dan Riley is?
Oh, can't imagine.
I don't know either. So a continuation of Dan Riley and some of the challenges he's facing as he starts. And he gets stuck on the 14th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., which you just saw on the video. And I used to cross that bridge every day for work. And I can tell you, I was not on the bridge, but next to it when the Air Florida plane crashed during the Reagan administration. So I'm not sure of the exact year. And
did that crash onto the bridge?
It crashed over the bridge and into the Potomac River.
Oh.
But it is a fact that that bridge carries tons of people every day. And I always had to cross a bridge. And I knew there were 3 critical bridges in DC. And if you close those down, you were, for the most part, locked out of getting into Washington for some time until they fixed them, which got me thinking about the bridge. And then it then moves into the real mystery. And that's when I turn it over to Gary for a while.
And perfectly set up, Ed. The attacks occur, and maybe, well, you know, when we start thinking the unthinkable, you come up with the unknowable, and ultimately what is on everyone's mind. So when we were writing it, we were not really thinking about America's infrastructure and how vulnerable it is, and certainly how out of date it is, and why it needs money. But we thought terrorists attacking America's infrastructure, the 14th Street Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, the bridge over the Mississippi at St. Louis, the Stan Musial Bridge, and closer to home, what would happen if Hoover Dam was targeted? And if so, what was the reason? Is it to cripple America, or is it a deception to keep our eyes off the prize, as the trailers say? And what is the prize? Is the prize the White House, or is the prize Eastern Europe with the Putinesque character, Nikolai Gorshkov? Is it a little bit of both? And what can Dan Riley, what can he do to get into the mix and prevent the worst from happening? Well, he happens to be traveling. He's in sometimes the right places, or he ends up going to the right places and finds himself very much in the mix of it, as he did in Red Hotel. A lot of the action takes place in the Ukraine, which, as we know, Crimea was already taken by Putin. Well, Nikolai Gorshkov is interested in taking more of Ukraine, but some of it takes place in Venezuela, which, like the Ukraine story, Venezuela comes right out of Ed's own experience. A different country, and Ed can talk about it, but the richness of the book, and you heard me talk about it 2 years ago, richness of the book is because the stories, so many of them are real, maybe fictionalized a little bit, but they're based on Ed's experiences. And I'm still learning what they are. He just peels them off a little at a time. And it's just, I've described this before. Imagine you're in a dinner party and you're sitting next to the most interesting person in the world with all the stories that and experiences this person has had. And then you have the ability and the opportunity to work with this person and to create something new. That's the joy I have with working with Ed. And then taking his stories, working with him and putting them into fiction, which isn't so far from reality.
No, that's
So-
the scary part.
Yes, it is. And Gary highlighted the situation in Venezuela. In reality, that plane crash occurred in Colombia. And we were on a jet provided by a Colombian bank trying to get me back to Miami for a trip to Tokyo. I didn't even stop. I was supposed to go straight through. And so the bankers who we'd been meeting with in the Colombian marketplace, because they were trying to sell us 3 hotels and we had visited them all, we met with them in Medellin, which has its own reputation. One of the cleanest, most beautiful cities you've ever seen until you think how it was built on cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And so we flew over to Cartagena on the private jet. There were 4 Marriott people, 3 Philadelphia bankers, and the crew of 2. And when we finished a dinner in Cartagena, turned down a site, and then got into the plane to go to Miami, the plane headed down the runway, the 2 left tires blew, and we started going in circles down the runway at 11 o'clock at night.
Oh,
And you'd have to invite me over to your house and I'll give you the whole story. So we just picked that story up and moved it over a few, probably a couple thousand miles over to Venezuela.
And again, that's where it's just so interesting. Unlike, and I love reading so many other thrillers, whether it's Lee Child's thrillers with Jack Reacher. But Jack Reacher is a creature made out of whole cloth. And Dan Riley is a character drawn from Ed's experiences. How many countries did you work in, Ed? And how many of those countries that you worked in actually went to red status, the highest elevated status for threat assessment?
Well, I had the good fortune to visit 151 countries,
wow.
evaluating potential properties, sites, and meetings. And we were operating when I retired in 73 countries. We had 80,000 associates. Felt good about creating jobs for people because until we opened them, those jobs did not exist. And at the same time, when we were operating in those markets, we were dealing with different cultures, different types of people, but you find out pretty quickly that they're the same types of people in every country the thing that is really different about that is the culture that they have developed over their history, which is really, really very interesting. So we were operating in 73 countries, and Gary asked the question, and how many were red hotels? I've never counted it by country, Gary, but we had 52 red hotels, and the larger countries were India and Egypt, as well as I'm missing one country that had a lot of hotels, Turkey.
Turkey.
And so those three countries we had a lot of presence in, and they were red.
And to Diane's question in the chat, your background, I'll give you a little head start on this, then you can take over. Ed was the former president of Marriott International, so in charge of all of the operations internationally and Hawaii. And that put him in global hotspots that had American tourists and American business women and men, as well as countries where maybe there weren't so many Americans, but the quality of the hotel, the American Marriott brand, was important for people to go to. If you remember, or I'll say it again, when I first met Ed, because we talked about this a couple of years ago, I met Ed thanks to a friend of ours, Bruce Fierstein, who wrote the first three Pierce Brosnan James Bond novels. And he said, got somebody for you to work with. He's the former president of Marriott International. Well, when I met him, I realized Ed was as much, and you're beginning to hear the stories, as much in the anti-terrorism business as the hotel business. His job was protecting people, not just making sure their experience in the hotel was good and right and safe, but really protecting them in ways that people never knew. And the red status, red in red deception and red hotel, doesn't refer to Russia. It refers to the highest elevated protection that can be there, which, Ed, when it's the high red status, what happens with people who want to do ill to the hotel generally?
Well, you're talking about the fact that if the hotel's at red status, they go through body protection as far as going through checks. All the luggage is x-rayed. There is a whole series, which Gary's seen, of steps we take around the hotel. We also have dogs. I see a pretty dog in the lower picture there. And it's ironic, I did not have a poodle in my life up to that point. And I would say to my head of security, when we started installing all the dogs, I said, if I see one poodle in our guard force, you're dead. Well, now my wife and I have a poodle. And so, and I love him dearly, love her dearly, the poodle and the wife. And so at this point, there were many, many steps that we took that we didn't talk about. We had a team of people that watched people watching the hotel. And the reason for that is that generally you could cut off an incident. And in India and in Indonesia, we actually had people arrested who were watching the hotel, turned them over to the police, and we haven't included that in the story yet, Gary. I should shut up. But actually, they wound up going to jail in Indonesia. Not sure what happened to them in India. Keep in mind, though, I had that job for 22 years, which is very long stint in the business world. And so I had a lot of time to have those adventures. And so the rating was required. I would be almost willing to bet the next book free to anybody who can tell me what the rating is right now in the United States.
I don't even know. Well, do we have ratings in the United
You
States?
do, but it's controlled by the government centrally. And that is why we had to create that system, because in all the other countries, they were all over the board. We had chartreuse, we we had purples, we had by birds. I mean, they were all over the board, and so we needed a unified system, which started with a clear, a blue, I'm having a little color dyslexia here. Then originally it went to yellow, went to orange, and then red. So that told each of the operators what level of security they had to have in their hotel. And we actually audited it for 2 years with an outside contractor to make sure they were doing it. It was that serious to us.
And Diane, love her note in the chat. Now I want to get the first book in the series. It is Red Hotel.
Which I have at Book Carnival.
Great, in a hardcover and paperback. And we had such a great event with you 2 years ago. So I'm glad you've got it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're reading a novel, clearly. And there are a lot of people who, are exciting and they're made up and they're interesting. It's not violent, although Red Hotel starts off with an explosion, but you're not really experiencing it in a way that you would in a movie. It's more some of the emotion of it. Likewise, the bridge at the beginning of Red Deception. But they are clear and present dangers. And for someone, Ed, who has been in the situation where not only has he had to be concerned about his own safety, but the safety of others, we're able to put you really right in the moment. There are bad guys and bad women. Sometimes you know who they are and sometimes you don't. That's what I think what makes a good mystery. There's action, but we think that a lot of the characters are really drawn from reality. You'll recognize personality types. We have good leaders and bad leaders all around the world, and some of them come up in the book. We have figures as in real life. If they know something and don't tell anybody what they know, there's a good chance, like this past January, that information won't bubble up. Or I always talk about the airline school, the flight school, where in 9/11, before 9/11, that people came in and said, "Hey, we want to learn how to fly a jumbo jet. We're not interested in knowing how to land it." Well, as the flight school head, wouldn't something like that make you want to report that up? Well, a lot of the people in our books do report up, but not everybody always does. And that's where danger really can happen.
Ed, when you were doing your thing and constantly traveling from hotel to hotel, was there ever a time when you had to evacuate a hotel and it was so bad that you knew you had to get everyone out?
And in several cases, that's true. But the first evacuation I had to deal with was when I was general manager in Boston. And actually, I was opening a brand new hotel, and sorry about how I say Boston fire laws required that you evacuate the entire hotel. We had 52 stories, and the challenge was great, and the number of complaints that I had to handle in person and on correspondence Monday mornings was even more severe. And so we gave away a lot of rooms, but when they built the hotel, the people that installed the life safety system messed it up. Now, if any of you have Boston history, there was a very famous, I know you do, Gary, very famous fire in a lounge in Boston in the 40s or 50s.
1942, I think.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that
Wow.
had made the fire laws in Boston some of the most rigid when they did. So we had to actually talk the fire department into doing the classic one floor above, one floor below where the incident was. But for almost 8 months, that little alarm would go off and anytime. And there is a lot of related stories to that. But your question was, did I ever have to do it? You do have to do that in a number of places. And we did experience that in Malaysia. We experienced it in several countries. But you weren't evacuating unless you had something already happening in the hotel. So, Indonesia, they had already had a bomb in the restaurant at the Ritz, and we had to evacuate the Ritz. In the case of these evacuations, though, and I'm going to go a little further, Gary, if I can, because we're on an important point for me. You want to stay in place when the issue is outside the building. So in Soviet Georgia, now referred to as Georgia, the Russians were coming in, if you remember. They were about 3/4 of a mile outside the city with their tanks. They were going to take Georgia over. We had 2 hotels. The debate was, do we try to evacuate in this late time or do we stay in place? And where are our people safest? And in that case, the argument was safest. And that stay in the hotel, don't go running out because you could get caught in a crossfire.
Sure.
And there were some crossfires that occurred in that time. So it's incident specific. And that's really the case. But you know how many people have the fire alarm go off, and they don't move? Which leads me to one of the, if you can bear with me, one of the saddest, but one of the craziest stories I've ever seen. In Islamabad, we had, well, it's been featured in films, we had a major truck approach the front gate filled with munition, and the truck blew up because of many security steps we had taken. And as a result, several, well, I'd say 25 of our security people were killed, a number of guests in the hotel, and it's talked about, and you can find it on internet. That whole thing was in 2 steps. The bomb obliterated the fire life system, which would have pumped water up to the rooms, and the hotel itself caught on fire. Nobody could agree on how it caught on fire. There was an argument that we had CIA and military security people staying in the hotel, and when they went into that room, they found them dead, but they also found what we call burn bags. They were burning documents. And so the theory was that's where the fire started. And I was there the day after because I was already in Asia. And this became a huge argument with insurance. We wound up in the ambassador's office, who basically said, you will never hear the United States agree to that story. You will just never hear it. So don't get caught up in that minutia. And then came the most amazing part of it. The morning after the explosion, a gentleman on the 5th floor got up, walked outside. The fire had already happened. He was totally not impacted by it and was trying to walk down to get breakfast.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow.
And we haven't used that yet either.
No, we have not. And I want you to talk about the story in Panama, which we haven't used yet. But before that, are we at green now? Lily is writing. Is the United States at green in terms of?
No.
Where are we?
Well, based on my last knowledge of the colors, we should be at orange. But we have bounced back but we haven't been in green since 9/11.
Wow.
So, but we're not at red.
We're not at red.
So you can see by that question, Gary, that, and I didn't manage the U.S. except for Hawaii, but Hawaii, we followed the U.S. rules. And we didn't have a lot of terrorists in Hawaii, except on vacation. So, yeah.
They're a little more mellow then.
Well, in Dubai, if the guy standing next to you at the streetlight was in a three-piece suit, he was could have been, you had a 50-50 chance that he was a terrorist, but he was there doing banking because all the terrorist money was in Dubai. And when was the last time you blew up your bank?
Good point.
So Dubai had very little concern about that aspect of terrorism, and we carried it very low as they did. But do you want me to touch on the Panama story?
Yeah,
or just
and I'm writing down
them in suspense? I don't know.
We're always
making notes.
Exactly. Even when we do interviews, I'm working, we're making notes, right? Yes, talk about Panama, because that is just chilling.
So you remember when Noriega was at his peak in Panama, and he was irritating the United States, which may be an understatement. And the canal was such a critical defensive issue for us that we actually sent troops into Panama. Well, at that time, we had only one hotel. We have about 10 now, but one hotel in Panama City. And so Noriega's troops were really going after any Americans they could find. They were going to arrest them, hold them as hostage. They were going to trade them. They had all sorts of plans. And as the fighting got worse, the order was just kill them. And our GM was in the United States having a surgery. So the team in the hotel was strictly Panamanian, the executive committee and the like. And they could see Noriega's troops moving toward the hotel, and they had about 67 Americans in the hotel. And so they rushed them down to the laundry, not to do their laundry, and put them in the laundry dryers, washers that lined the wall, and then put some clothes over them. So if you looked in there, you just saw clothes. And so they got everybody. Now, hotel laundries are huge, and they got everybody in those. And along came Noriega's troops. They machine gunned every door in the hotel, which I saw, which meant they were not knocking on the door going, anybody here? They were just spraying the doors as they went down the road. And they came down to the laundry, and our laundry manager was there and our resident manager. And they asked, where you have any Americans? No. Have you seen any Americans? No. Okay. Any nationalities other than Panamanian? No. And so they left. We then and it's another side story. I don't want to take all your time, but we then, as a company, had put pressure on the military to get a truck or something over to the hotel to get these people out. And so that meant they had to detach a company of infantry to support that truck while they got all the people into the truck and got them to the military base and subsequently to the airport. So it's interesting, but every one of these stories has another story hanging on it.
You can see why I just feel so lucky. And if any of you want to start writing with Ed, forget it. I've got him tied up. I've got him. We're gonna keep this going. And also, when I first met Ed, I didn't ask Ed, but I asked around, and I think that's probably a question that you would have too, considering all the information that you need in order to protect American citizens, let alone any nationals around the world. You must have relationships with, oh, let's see, maybe the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, Interpol, one after another. And the fact is, yes, Ed did. My question, Ed, do most people in international business have those kinds of contacts, or is it unique for you in the level of business that you had around the world?
And I answered Gary, but I didn't answer him completely when we first met. This really came in subsequent conversations. And when I told Gary CIA, his eyes lit up. You can see the writer coming alive in him. And so, but the answer is most major international companies have somebody working in them or some buddies, because it was two with us, Alan and myself, Alan being the security guy, working with them for different reasons and different situations, which we haven't all used in our book yet. But, in one case, they asked us to take care of a Russian general's son while the father was being interrogated over a long period of time. And the son was getting kind of, what's going to happen to me? And so all of a sudden he was working at the company in a particularly fun spot for him, which today makes me a little nervous, which was he was into the internet. And of course we do a lot of work with the internet on reservations and everything else, but we were at the basic level then, and so he was working on that. So you might say one secret is that Marriott's reservation system and the internet website is somewhat been built by the Russians, but I can't go that far.
Don't give up your Marriott card.
Yeah.
Ed, when you spoke about the when Noriega's people came in and they just sprayed the hotel doors, was there no concern that there might be Panamanians staying there?
Apparently, now not being there, all I saw was the evidence, but the assumption was by that time, keep in mind the staff was there, housekeeping could have been up there.
Right.
But the hotel was pretty quiet in the 67, 60, I'm stuck on which number in the 60s were there. They just didn't have any regard at that point. Noriega was in trouble, and it was a desperate step to do that. And when you've got people boxed in, as the US military was doing, then the problem becomes, you feel in a corner. These guys just probably went ahead, but I just can't confirm that to you. All I saw were each door just sprayed with machine guns fire.
Shocking.
Now, I'm not going to spoil anything, so there's no spoiler alert here. But people who read Red Hotel were very curious about Dan Riley's relationship with a woman named Marnie Babbitt. Some people really, really liked her, and other people thought, why is he connecting with this woman? And they developed a relationship. Their relationship grows in the second book, in Red Deception. And I'll just leave it at that. Ed, is that enough?
Well, I think that's enough, but I do have to put in some substantial statements. Number one, that was not my wife. I married an Italian, but I did not marry
A Brit. A Brit. Uh-huh.
Brit. And number two, it was not my ex-wives that are fictional in the book. And so that particular piece kind of started in the Gary method, method of creating a character. And while I supported it throughout both books, I did not bring it home.
It's a fascinating life. How do you feel about, do you miss it? How could you not?
Well, I didn't miss Vietnam, and I still went through my year there and came out with my recognition from the military. But my most concerning times in that job were when we had kidnappings. And it was the toughest part of the job because you knew probably the person whose life was at stake or had met them. In the case in Lebanon, it was the controller of finance for the hotel. In Mexico, it was the entire executive committee. There were probably more kidnappings in Mexico than any other single location.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not necessarily encouraging people to go to Mexico anymore, but at that time I was. So I miss it, you bet. I miss the people I had as a team because at my going away party, my CFO, one of my first, I had three, stood up and said, I never thought you'd do it, but you sent me to Saudi Arabia to work on that problem with the financing in the two hotels we had at the time. And she said, I never thought you'd do that. And I said, Fern, it was because of your nature. She was a little older, so she could get past the Saudi issues. And I had confidence in you. And she said, well, it gave me a faith that I never had before. So my people have their own set of stories, be they the Salvadorian owner that got into an argument with the gun and with the HR coordinator that was my regional. And, you know, I could go on and on because each of them have their own stories.
I've been taking notes.
I can tell.
I look away. You see me look away, and I'm taking notes.
Well, things come out when he reminisces.
Absolutely right. It's truth.
Do you stay in touch with many of the people?
Oh, absolutely. We've had 2 reunions. I've got the picture if you want it, but I have to black out certain ones since they're still active. And now that was a joke, and you knew it.
Okay.
But we keep in touch a great deal. I've lost 4 of them, not through any of the stories I told you, but through health.
Mhm.
And we miss them greatly. I had a great opportunity. I had 3 CFOs. All 3 were female. And one had extensive experience. She was the CFO for Coke Asia. when we hired her. And and one had a little less experience. And in a matter of a year, she was into it comfortably and involved. Nobody stayed in their office with their feet on the desk. They were all out there, in the field. And that's what made a difference. And when you spend time with people in these issues, you become more than friends. You really get to know each other and, talk a lot. I just lost Kevin Kearney, who was a developer from cancer, and he was in his late 50s. And with us, he was tremendous. And he was in the plane when we crashed in Cartagena. And the ones that were in that plane, we get together on the phone or on email now. I'm still not as sophisticated on Instagram. So I take it one step at a time.
Ed, a couple of things. Barbara writes that she loves the stories, but it wants her to just stay at home. So we should talk about how safe things are. Also, Diane asked, was the hotel rebuilt? I think that might be the one in Panama. So I'm going to throw those to two of you, but those two questions to you. But you also mentioned, and I got to hold it up, your business book. You can't lead with your feet on the desk. You're hearing that that's what Ed's experience is. And if you see all these tabs in here, these are also stories that have been working into our books, our novels. So it's a great business book. So is it safe to travel? And is I believe it was the Panama Hotel, has that been rebuilt?
Yeah, okay. So safe to travel. I had a run with cancer earlier this year, which makes me a little more susceptible. I'm in good shape though, so Gary's planning on 6 or 7 books before we change characters.
Hey.
But the fact is, I'm fine. It's another story that I'm very happy with, City of Hope. The truth of the matter is, I would not travel in an aircraft probably until 22, but it's driven by COVID, not driven by concern.
Yeah.
And the COVID issue is the only thing that keeps me out of the air. Now, I still have a consulting job. I am going to have to get in the air. I am already meeting people in California, but I have to fly within the US. The second issue is international travel. Same thing, COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But, and Gary, we haven't talked about this. I have now, as I've gotten a little older, because I flew them when I was a lot younger, several airlines that you couldn't get me on with a stick. And so on the international side. So I'm cautious. And in the last 10 years, I knew which airline I was on. And I knew whether I wanted to be there or seek another route for the air carrier. And I'm always available to answer that question for you. The other question was the Panama Hotel. We eventually built a beautiful hotel in downtown Panama City, and we sold that hotel, the Panama property, to a company in Japan who put the Westin brand on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when it was Western International. It quickly turned to Westin. And it's been in that situation. But I've retired 8 years ago, and I'd have to send a regional, and I'll be glad to do that and ask Brian if we've still got that property. But I think I told you we have several more properties that we probably went with the newer properties. It was a great property. It was about 400 rooms. So they had to use a lot of lead to go down that hallway. But I'm pretty sure it's not. This resident manager did very well in his career, but I struggle now that Marriott's 6,000 hotels to keep up with everybody except a very set of people.
You know, this seems like a perfect book and memories to go into a movie or a TV series. Has there been any talk of that?
We have been
always talk, and it was how Bruce and I started talking about needing a book to be able to do a movie. Once again, in some of our efforts, which were going very well, COVID-19 showed up, and Hollywood, for the most part, other than reality and game shows, closed down a lot of the new shows that were overseas or the like, and that would have been
Right.
ours. And so I had a discussion with Bruce 3 days ago, and we're going to meet with Gary in a week or two, and we're going to scratch our heads and see what the best strategy is. But sure, any of you got enough money we can put into it, we'll go in a minute.
We wish, right?
Right.
They're certainly, they're written in a filmic, cinematic way.
Yes.
And there's, I'll go back to the point I was talking about before. If you know something, you share it, you pass it on. Ed's experiences in a thriller form, in a novel form, he is working with other people and relies on a crisis committee back at the Chicago headquarters to actually help map strategy. He shares information, he gets information, he works with the CIA characters and the FBI characters, as well as someone in the State Department. You saw in the trailer that State Department mention was dealing with the Secretary of State in the trailer. Unlike a Bourne novel or a James Bond novel or Jack Reacher novel, where people are independent, they're just working on their own. These stories really do represent the real world, and the real world that we live in, with real and present dangers, with the acknowledgement that if you see something, you should say something, no matter where you live. If it's at a restaurant, if it's at an airport, if it's walking down the street, like I've seen a suitcase abandoned on the street, and it makes you wonder, what is it? And it's time to report it, and because we don't know.
Right.
And thriller writers and screenwriters are the ones who Washington is now leaning on to tell them at the Pentagon and the CIA, the NSA, and other agencies, what do we need to worry about? What do we need to think about? If you've thought about it in a novel, if you put it in a movie, is it possible? Could it happen? And right after 9/11, that's who was called in. We hadn't been writing at that point, but that's who was called into Washington, among others, but thriller writers, because we're thinking about what may just be tomorrow's headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes our editors say, I love when this happens, actually, Ed knows this so well. Our editor in both books, we put a note in the column in Track Changes. This is interesting, but this doesn't seem very realistic. Because this really happened? I said, here's Ed's phone number. Okay, he'll tell you the story. Come over to Book Carnival. Watch it on Zoom. The interview will be there. It's real.
Yes.
It's real. Again, that's just the joy and the fun of all this in a world that's not so much fun anymore. I mean, we're thinking about things and worried about things we never had to worry about. Heck, we used to think that ducking under a desk would save us from a nuclear blast with duck and cover exercises. That's how, that's the world we used to live in.
And Gary and I had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out who the bad guy was. You're probably well aware of who it is because you've read the book. But I like to call him the puppet master, which we will not use in the book, but he reminds me of it. And if you think about it, you have our North Korean president. He's not an emperor yet. We're getting there.
Supreme leader.
He's Supreme leader. That's the title. And he has had assassinations in other countries. Malaysia, he took out his brother. We know that our puppet master, Mr. Putin, has also taken out people outside of Russia, and God knows how many inside of Russia. Mm-hmm. Now, I spent time in Russia, and the interesting thing is during the time I was there opening hotels, Putin was bidding against Luchkov, and Luchkov was the mayor of Moscow. We used to call him 5% Luchkov because he tried to take 5% on every deal. And at that time, we were telling him we weren't paying. So we were walking a little bit of a line there. Every premier of Russia since Stalin had been the former mayor of Moscow. Putin pushed him out of the way like there was no issue, no problem. He's gone. I should look up now that I said that and see what he's doing. I suspect he may be growing a garden over him, or he may be somewhere else. But the fact is, Putin had power like I had never seen. And now, Xi in China, if you get in, and I did well over 100 trips to China because it was one of our main targets, bad choice of word, but one location that we wanted a lot of Marriotts in. And Xi, unlike his predecessors, was in the 5th year of a 10-year term. And I was talking to 3 or 4 of my close friends who are Chinese and would talk about the subject. There are a lot of people that wouldn't. And they all said, notice Xi in his 5th year has finally got control of the army. Well, what that means is he's done away with the other generals that would have been against him. And once he gets control of the army, things are going to change. And I said, well, give me a guidance on that. I said, in the newspaper, he has done an exceptional job of saying he's clearing up corruption and, talks about it and spends time on it. And they said, and if you counted the people that were put away in jail for corruption, they were his enemies. Now he is in control.
I don't have an answer.
And Alexa, go away. And she got into the game. And the answer was, now the corruption will begin again. And now things are going to go his way for the next 5 years. Well, as you know, he's just declared himself a lifetime job. And if you notice, things are changing in China like crazy. Yeah. All around security, control. They've got the largest fleet of ships. However, they're not heavy like the American fleet, but they are doing things. And I was just talking again to one of my friends in China, and they say Hong Kong's already gone. They're not being reported, but China totally controls Hong Kong right now. Mm-hmm. And so the real question that everybody's talking about is Taiwan.
Yes.
Yeah.
So each of these countries, how many people Chi did away with to get power, people forget that's going on every day around us. And then you get some of these little countries, Uganda and some of the others, that's happening every day. And so the world is not as different as we may think when you think back to 100 years like.
Fascinating, but scary.
It is.
Well, any other questions from folks?
Yeah.
I'm
Thank
looking
you,
at
Gary, for that nice compliment.
Thank you. You're very welcome. You do
Patrick
have
and
the greatest
everyone.
bookstore. It's wonderful.
Well, we look forward to the next book, which you've been making copious notes about, and we'll try to fit them into either the third or the fourth book, right?
Right. And we appreciate that.
Look at that. And hopefully the next time you'll be live at the store.
It was fun last time.
Yes.
And my wife was there, and Gary Helen was there.
Yes, she was.
And it was a great turnout of people.
It was.
And we look forward. The next one is Red Chaos, and we're not putting out the name on the fourth one yet. But I noticed Gary had separated his notes into 3 and 4. So
Smart man.
Indeed, it's true.
Well, you have a wealth of information, but I'm sure you don't always, you're talking more tonight that he probably hasn't heard. So he was very smart to make notes.
well, we talk about more than you might expect when two people work together, but I'm so involved in having fun. Now, I'm retired. I'm having fun doing this. So the stories I can back up with clips of newspapers, anything you want. But the fact is, doing fiction allows me to have fun, characters, far more wives than I would ever think of, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I enjoyed my first book, which was business, and I did myself with Wiley, and a very good editor from Wiley, because I wasn't that good on the book. And we had a lot of fun getting it out, and still out there.
Mhm.
But I would ask a favor of you and your listeners.
Okay.
We've been marketing now 2 books. We've done a lot of marketing. And one of the things that is strange to me is the value of the reviewer that is in Amazon. And right now we're running strong with 5s on this book. And if any of you feel good about that, I'm not asking anybody to write something they don't want to write. I'd prefer if you don't want to write a 5, forget it. But I'm the amateur in the book business, but we could sure use some reviews if you feel good about it.
You can buy it from Anne and still do a review on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anne and Book Carnival would appreciate that.
Definitely.
Definitely. We have a lot of people listening, and more will be talking about it at book club and in the newsletter, and they will be able to see the recording of this. So goodness knows what's going to happen to Amazon. It may blow up.
Terrific. Well, I love reading the questions, and Lily and Barbara, Diane, Patrick, Sharon, thank you so much. And everyone who will be watching this later. And Anne, I said it before, you have the best bookstore, and we look forward to getting back there in person with you.
And we do as well. It'll be a real treat to have you both there.
Thank
you so much for tonight. It was wonderful.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.